right now it's time to get Orkun Kılıç, who is the creator of Citrea. He takes responsibility for bringing ZK rollups to Bitcoin. He became famous this year for bringing the first rollup. And he also earned the respect of his critics, which is why I respect him even more. Super Testnet, Robin, Linus, they were saying you're not building something legit, and they came back and they said, you know, this guy's for real. So pay attention, you're gonna hear about him a lot.
Thank you a lot. Hello everyone, I'm Orkun, I am CEO of Chainway Labs and co-creator of Citrea. Today I won't be just specifically talking about Citrea, but in general the ecosystem in Bitcoin and how do we get to hyperbitcoinization and define hyperbitcoinization as well. I'm a bit sick, sorry about my voice. And yeah, let's get it started. I think this one is not correct. Okay, I was pressing to the wrong button. Okay, so let's start with the Bitcoin white paper, where everything is defined and put in a way that a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. So in 2008, Satoshi had a single goal, simple use case, which is the payment, and simple goal, no centralized or custodial institutions taking over this electronic cash. And a couple of years after Daniel Kravis, now I think supports the BSV scam, is like put this in a way that hyperbitcoinization is a voluntary transition from an inferior currency to a superior one, and its adoption is a series of individual acts of entrepreneurship rather than a single monopolist that games the system. So at the same article that he defines hyperbitcoinization, he also talks about hyperinflation. So hyperinflation is a kind of democratization when the government inflates the currency at an accelerating pace. Hyperbitcoinization is a different, but it will appear superficially similar. So in both kind of events, prices in the doomed currency will skyrocket until it is not a currency at all. So I'm coming from Istanbul, Turkey. I'm born and raised in Turkey, but I live in Istanbul, so I'm very familiar with this hyperinflation thing. And you can see the stats over here, like in Turkey, it is like close to 90% in paper, but in reality, it is more than 100% for sure. In Argentina, it was the same. And in Zimbabwe, it was the same when they removed their currency, and now they bring it back, and it happened the same thing to them. And they shared a common thing with these currencies and Bitcoin, and that is their chart looks like this compared to the Bitcoin. They all went to zero, like Argentinian peso, Turkish lira, they literally zero compared to the Bitcoin's value. And this is not just like for these countries that are developing and kind of, I can say maybe not the first countries that you can think of, but compared to this, USD also looks the same. It is no different than any other currency, no different than Turkish lira, no different than Argentinian peso. It is governed and simply controlled by a centralized and custodial institution that prints the money and hyperinflates to make profit for their small classes and their friends. And why Bitcoin is a superior currency? Because it is decentralized, which means it is verifiable by everyone that has an access to the internet and a small computer. And that's why it is also censorship resistant, where you can transact without getting anyone's will by just sending a transaction and broadcasting it to a peer-to-peer network. And that's why it is also borderless, because Bitcoin nodes is not aware of location of other nodes. They just have some kind of IP, which is currently a bit more centralized than it should be in the future, but it is still borderless. And for the hyperbitcoinization, there's a growth model that's described in a Medium article by this writer called Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I really like this because it clearly shows the stages of Bitcoin and how do we get to the hyperbitcoinization point, where at the beginning there was a very minimal value of Bitcoin, and there was innovators, miners, small meetings, and at the later stage, now there's micro bubbles, which engineers are coming to Bitcoin, trying to build some stuff like building very primitive exchanges, building wallets, nodes, mining pools, started organizing conferences. And now at the bubbles phase, I think we are in here right now. We are seeing new kind of exchanges which are trying new stuff rather than just having all the custody. And now we are also seeing layers. So this article was maybe like 8 or 9 years ago, but mentioning about like layers as a like milestone in there. And also there is the industry use, which is getting started. And after, this is the tipping point with green, you can see. And all of these stages, Bitcoin starts as store of value, which you can have a Bitcoin, and it should store its value over the years compared to the other centralized currencies. But as the red curve grows, then you have the medium of exchange, where you can transact Bitcoin freely to other people with high throughput and willingly like low fees as well. And the final goal is to have unit of accounts where we denominate everything in Bitcoin, so we don't have to have any other form of money. We can obviously have other assets, like we own our house, we own maybe some stock in some company, but eventually money should be Bitcoin. So we are coming to the tipping point where now we are seeing new exchanges, new layers, broad industry use, and even seeing like some institutions adopting Bitcoin, some banks adopting Bitcoin, and some governments adopting Bitcoin. So this is really a tipping point for us. So there's a rapid price appreciation in that model, and it comes with a minimal price volatility at the end. But this means Bitcoin will see a lot of load on its base layer, not just as a currency, because if you transact Bitcoin in some centralized exchange, it doesn't mean anything to Bitcoin, and it's not your Bitcoin. But in the real scenario where we hold our keys non-custodially, then this brings a load to Bitcoin. So this is the challenge from store of value to unit of accounts. Bitcoin L1 cannot handle to scale to everyone, and Bitcoin L1 cannot scale for all use cases. In real world, with money, you just don't simply pay for buying something. You also do other operations. Yeah, like you lend your money, you borrow your money, you use other assets like securities, like buying a mortgage, I don't know, but it is more than a bit just like doing simple payments. You need to have more functionality to do similar things to payments, but not just payments. So let's get back to the definition of hyperbitcoinization. Hyperbitcoinization will be achieved through a series of individual acts of entrepreneurship. I think this is the individual acts of entrepreneurship, rather than staying in this just single box, which is the L1, and trying to make the blocks bigger, which didn't work out, or trying other stuff. We should allow any kind of experimentation to be done on Bitcoin to improve Bitcoin. All of these will get with like some trust assumption. They are not perfect. Even Lightning, it is trustless, but is it perfect? No, it is not perfect. And all of these layers will come with some kind of trust assumption, some better UX, some worse UX. But eventually we need to have this experimentation to reach a point that we find the optimal trust assumption, hopefully trustless, and we can do more stuff with our Bitcoin. And we will have multiple settlement layers, we will have multiple DA layers, and multiple projects and applications on those projects that will shape the future of Bitcoin. And that's why we are building Citrea. We are building for a Bitcoin-backed economy and designing Citrea as the execution shard of Bitcoin. So the ideal goal is to become a trustless ZK rollup with some kind of soft fork. This can be an OPCAT, this can be an OpZKP, but today we are building a trust-minimized ZK rollup settled on Bitcoin using BitVM2, which are fork of BitVM2, I can say Clementine that Sergey mentioned in his presentation. But maybe a bit story about Citrea, that we didn't just like think, okay, ZK rollups are cool, let's build them on Bitcoin. I think when we launched Citrea brand, everyone think in that way, because I did my first interview with Vlad, and everyone saying that, okay, this guy took something from Ethereum and trying to build on Bitcoin without a purpose. But we actually get from a point there we see ordinals are happening on Bitcoin. And despite ordinals, there were like some side chains, side systems like Stacks and Rootstock and like some other alt currencies, but they never seen high usage, even though there's a lot of pressure on the Bitcoin L1. And that is a simple reason, because people want to use Bitcoin, BTC, as their money. They don't want to use other assets as their money. And they do want to transact with the security of Bitcoin by simply using Bitcoin block space. And they are not willing to just get rid of their rights by switching to some other currency or going to a side chain where they lost a lot of security of Bitcoin. So, and these are some of the use cases that I can briefly talk about. Today, in Bitcoin, we are in a stage that in order to have a privacy, we need to trust custodial means. They come within a form of eCash or Fedimint, which you simply trust with your Bitcoin. And those solutions they're not Bitcoin. If you deposit to a eCash or Cashew, then you are not simply holding any Bitcoin. You are holding a note that's pressed by some mint, which has no value compared to Bitcoin. If you just look at the Bitcoin, those notes are just they're simply nonsense. In order to do payments, you say, okay, let's use Lightning, because why not? That's designed for payments. Then you try to open a wallet, and there are 20 pop-ups coming up. Okay, channel liquidity, done. Send money, done. Oh, but I onboarded custodially. But okay, it doesn't matter. But at the end, these solutions have some factor that makes them converge to custodial solutions, like we see in payments. Most people use custodial Lightning wallets to make payments and think that's fine. But it cannot be the permanent solution for Bitcoin. And the other use case, you need some other currency or some other asset in real world to do something, because the other counterparty doesn't know about Bitcoin. And now you have to sell your Bitcoin to do this, or you have to lend your Bitcoin and just collateralize with that Bitcoin and get some other assets. And now you are trusting custodial lending desks to do it. And even for buying a Bitcoin, you are just giving your fiat money to some other custodial to buy Bitcoin, which is not ideal. So for all of these use cases, we want to make them non-custodial. We want to make privacy non-custodial. We want to make payments non-custodial. We want to make borrowing against Bitcoin non-custodial. And we want to make buying Bitcoin non-custodial. So even though you hold another asset, which can be a security, which can be a fiat represent coin, then you can have them non-custodially and simply switch to a Bitcoin anytime without asking for anyone or going to a custodial solution. And some other interesting thing that we can talk about here is Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. I think when I say about stablecoins, people think that, okay, these are like USDC and USDT or similar stuff. But they are not simply stablecoins. They are just fiat-pegged coins where they are pegged to $1 or some other currency. And you are trusting that currency will not get inflated. But what I'm talking here is an actual stable coin, which is stable against other currencies in the world, like dollar, like euro. I think this is the best example here is the RAI token on Ethereum. Maybe some of you know, which is a stable coin backed by Ethereum. And it actually performs well compared to the euro, dollar, Japanese yen, and other currencies. And it is much more stable than Ethereum. And it's still backed by Ethereum. So, for example, just porting this use case to Bitcoin is a huge win for me, because now we have an asset that is fully backed by Bitcoin. So you can get your Bitcoin anytime if you minted these assets. And this asset is more stable than Bitcoin today. So you can do payments to the merchant, which doesn't accept Bitcoin today. They can accept this token because it is much more stable than Bitcoin. And it can be even much more liquid with local currency shops that you can simply switch to a fiat currency for that. So these are just like example of some use cases that I can talk in 5 minutes. But by building a generic execution shard on Bitcoin, we enable all of these use cases come to Bitcoin without changing Bitcoin. So our testnet went live 4 days ago on testnet 4, which is very interesting because I think we are the first application on testnet 4. It's still not so clear about the future of testnet 4, but it's good for us to experiment this rollup on top of Bitcoin and show that it is actually connected to Bitcoin, because there will be a lot of reorgs on testnet which our rollup has to handle. But yeah, if you want to experiment with any of these, you can see our Twitter account here and web account here. There's a lot of guides on how you can develop some applications or how you can simply onboard to Citrea, which doesn't require you to open a channel or find a counterparty. You can simply have a static address and get your funds there and start using Citrea without going through this custodial stuff. And yes, that's all about my presentation. So if you have any questions about the technicalities of Citrea that I can explain or about this presentation. Thank you.